For nearly 500 years, a missing genetic signal lay beneath a Pueblo village in northern New Mexico. Archaeologists knew that Athabaskan-speaking people, the ancestors of the Navajo and Apache, had eventually entered the American Southwest from the north. Historians argued about when they arrived. Some placed the migration shortly before Europeans appeared. Others believed small Athabaskan communities had been living among Pueblo peoples centuries earlier, leaving so few traces that archaeology had simply missed them. Then in 2025, a team working with Picuris Pueblo compared genomes from 16 ancient people with DNA from 13 present-day tribal members. The ancient individuals covered almost 1,000 years of local history. Researchers expected that if Athabaskan ancestry had entered the region early, some trace might have appeared before Spanish contact. It did not. In every Picuris individual who lived before 1500, the signal was missing. Yet, in present-day Picuris people, it was there. Something had happened after the final ancient burials. The discovery did not mean Navajo ancestors appeared from nowhere in the 16th century. It did not prove that every earlier migration theory was wrong, and it did not identify one exact year when a northern family first crossed into the Southwest. Picuris Pueblo was one community, not the entire region. Marriage could have moved mainly in one direction, carrying Pueblo ancestry into southern Athabaskan communities without leaving the reverse signal in ancient Picuris graves. Small mobile groups can also remain nearly invisible archaeologically. But the result supported a possibility many people found astonishing. The Navajo identity, now inseparable from the Four Corners, may have taken recognizable form in the Southwest far more recently than popular history suggests. Then genetics revealed an even deeper surprise. The people who moved south were not simply one unchanged population from Western Canada. Their ancestry had already been shaped by at least two major histories in the far north. One connected them to the first peoples who spread through the Americas more than 15,000 years ago. The other connected them to later Arctic migrants related to the Paleo-Eskimo world, people who entered Alaska thousands of years after the first settlement of the continents. By the time Athabaskan-speaking ancestors began their long southward movement, the mixture had already happened. And when they reached the Southwest, they mixed again. This is the verified story behind the title. It is not a story about mysterious Amazonian DNA appearing among the Navajo. No major genomic study has established a population-wide signal in the Navajo, and no credible genetic evidence requires an ancient Pacific or Atlantic voyage to explain their ancestry. It is also not a story in which a few unusual Y chromosomes overturn the linguistic connection between Navajo and northern Athabaskan peoples. The real evidence supports that connection while showing how incomplete a simple migration arrow can be. The Navajo call themselves Diné, often translated as the people. Their language, Diné Bizad, belongs to the southern Athabaskan branch of the vast Nadine language family. Closely related Apache languages are spoken in the Southwest, while distant linguistic relatives stretch north through western Canada and interior Alaska. Other Athabaskan languages occur along parts of the Pacific coast. The separation is enormous. A language family whose largest territory lies in the subarctic has two southern branches more than 2,000 kilometers away. That geographic gap was one of the first clues to migration. Linguists can compare shared vocabulary, grammar, sound changes, and verb structures to reconstruct relationships between languages. Navajo is not merely a Pueblo language containing a few northern words. Its deepest structure is Athabaskan. The relationship is as real as the connection between Spanish, French, and Latin, even though the languages have changed independently. But language cannot give an exact travel itinerary. It does not reveal how many groups moved, which mountain passes they used, whether families traveled together, or how often they joined people already living along the route. For those questions, researchers turn to archaeology, oral histories, genetics, and the records made after Europeans entered the region. Those sources do not always produce the same timeline. The oldest direct archaeological evidence widely proposed as Navajo-affiliated comes from the Gobernador area of northwestern New Mexico, where a wooden structure produced a tree ring date of 1541. A broader archaeological pattern called the Tierra Blanca complex has sometimes been linked to early southern Athabascans and could push their presence into the 15th century. Other archaeologists argue that ancestors arrived earlier, perhaps centuries before that, but highly mobile populations using perishable shelters would leave a faint record. The 2025 Picuris genomes strengthened the late arrival interpretation. Researchers found no Athabaskan ancestry in Picuris individuals predating 1500 and judged the most likely movement into the southwest to have occurred after that point. This was not a direct sequencing project on Navajo ancestors. It used Pueblo genomes and comparisons with previously studied southern Athabaskan-related data. The distinction matters, especially because the Navajo Nation has restricted genetic research for decades. Still, when the new result is placed beside language and archaeology, the migration becomes difficult to dismiss. The deeper genetic trail begins much farther north. Most ancestry among indigenous peoples of the Americas derives from the founding populations that became isolated from Asian ancestors during the late Ice Age, and then expanded through the continents. Those founding people were themselves not genetically simple. Their ancestry included lineages related to East Asians and ancient North Eurasians, populations represented partly by a 24,000-year-old Siberian boy from Malta. This ancient mixture occurred before the major expansion into the Americas, so it is shared broadly rather than belonging specifically to the Navajo. Later, another population entered the Arctic. Around 5,000 years ago, people associated with the Arctic small tool tradition spread rapidly eastward from Alaska across the North American Arctic. Geneticists often call their ancient descendants Paleo-Eskimos, although the term describes archaeological populations rather than modern identity. One famous genome came from a man buried in Greenland about 4,000 years ago, known as Sa-Kak. Early whole genome studies noticed that Athabaskan-speaking populations carried an ancestry component not fully explained by the main first American lineage. One analysis proposed that roughly 10% might come from a source related to Sa-Kak. Later research using more detailed patterns of rare variants and shared DNA segments reconstructed a larger Paleo-Eskimo-related contribution in sampled northern Athabaskan populations, modeling them with approximately 29 to 38% Sa-Kak-related ancestry. Those figures are model-dependent. They are not a percentage measured directly in every Navajo person, and they should not be used as a tribal blood calculation. The sampled populations, comparison groups, and statistical methods affect the estimate, but the broader conclusion is strong. Paleo-Eskimo-related ancestry became widespread among Na-Diné-speaking peoples after Paleo-Eskimo migrants mixed with earlier First Peoples in Alaska. This was the ancestry carried into the Athabaskan world before the southern migration began. It solves one mystery while creating another. The spread of Paleo-Eskimo ancestry overlaps strikingly with Na-Dene languages, leading researchers to ask whether the Arctic small tool expansion helped spread an ancestral language connected to Na-Dene. Genetics cannot hear a language spoken 5,000 years ago, so the connection remains a hypothesis rather than a proven translation from DNA to speech. A population can adopt another group's language without receiving much ancestry, or receive ancestry without changing language. The safest conclusion is that the ancestors of northern Athabaskan peoples emerged through contact between an older first American population and Paleo-Eskimo-related newcomers. Their descendants later diversified across Alaska and Canada. Much later, one part of that wider Athabaskan world moved south. The 2003 study mentioned in the viral reference was real, but its findings were transformed beyond recognition. Researchers did not extract mysterious ancient DNA from teeth and discover a foreign Navajo lineage. They studied mitochondrial variation among 117 Native American participants from the Southwest and compared patterns across 18 populations. Mitochondrial DNA traces only one maternal line, not a person's entire ancestry. Their conclusion was straightforward and important. Southern Athabascans probably experienced a population bottleneck, followed by extensive admixture during their migration into the Southwest. A bottleneck occurs when a population passes through a period with relatively few ancestors, causing some lineages to become common while others disappear by chance. A small migrating group could carry only part of the genetic diversity present in the northern homeland. After arriving, marriages and adoptions involving neighboring peoples could add new maternal and paternal lines. The result would not perfectly match northern Athabaskan frequencies, even though the language and much of the ancestry came from the north. Mitochondrial haplogroup A2A provides part of the northern trail. It appears frequently among northern Athabaskan and some Arctic populations and is also found among southern Athabascans. Certain A2A branches support a connection between northern and southwestern Athabaskan peoples, but another maternal branch, B2A, reaches high frequencies among Navajo and Apache communities while also appearing widely among non-Athabaskan populations in the Southwest. Researchers have proposed that B2A entered southern Athabaskan populations through admixture with people already living in the region, including Pueblo communities and other Southwestern groups. Historical practices such as intermarriage, adoption, alliance, and the incorporation of captives could move maternal lineages across linguistic boundaries. That is not a biological anomaly. It is evidence that Navajo ethnogenesis happened in the Southwest. Ethnogenesis is the formation of a people through the creation of shared identity, institutions, kinship, territory, language, and tradition. It does not imply that the Diné were invented suddenly or that their northern ancestry became irrelevant. It means the recognizable Navajo nation, developed as migrating Athabaskan-speaking groups, encountered a densely populated landscape with long-established Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Hispanic, and later American communities. The maternal and paternal lines do not need to tell identical stories. In societies where residence, marriage, warfare, or adoption affected men and women differently, mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes can show different patterns. One lineage might preserve the northern migration more clearly. Another might record local incorporation. Whole genomes combine thousands of ancestral lines and reveal a network rather than two competing stories. The reference script turns that complexity into rumors of transoceanic contact. It claims Navajo Y chromosomes point toward unexplained populations and that a 2021 Harvard and Max Planck study found Amazonian population Y ancestry in the Southwest. No such Navajo discovery appears in the major published studies. Population Y is a faint genetic affinity detected most clearly in several indigenous groups from Amazonia, who share slightly more ancestry with present-day Australasian-related populations than other Native Americans do. Researchers have debated whether it reflects structure in the founding population of the Americas or more than one early movement. Ancient genome studies have searched for the signal in North and South America, but it has not become a demonstrated Navajo ancestry component. Adding the Navajo to that mystery creates drama by moving evidence thousands of kilometers from where it was observed. The verified Navajo mystery lies north, not across an ocean. Yet ancestry alone cannot explain why the Diné became so different from northern relatives. The answer is written in culture. When Athabaskan-speaking groups arrived in the Southwest, they entered a world shaped by centuries of Pueblo farming, architecture, trade, and ceremony. Maize agriculture was already ancient. Communities built stone and adobe settlements, managed water, produced pottery and textiles, and maintained networks across the Colorado Plateau and Rio Grande. The newcomers did not simply copy this world. They interacted with it through exchange, conflict, marriage, captivity, and cooperation. They adopted maize agriculture while retaining mobility. They developed the hogan as a central home form with practical and ceremonial meaning. Clan relationships expanded as people from different origins were incorporated into Diné society. Oral traditions preserve accounts of clans connected with Pueblo and other neighboring peoples. This flexibility became one of the greatest sources of Navajo strength. Spanish colonization introduced sheep, goats, horses, metal tools, and new markets. Sheep became central to Diné economy, family life, and identity. Navajo women transformed weaving into a tradition recognized around the world, building upon older indigenous textile knowledge while adapting wool, vertical looms, dyes, patterns, and trade demands. Calling it merely borrowed misses the creative process. Adoption did not leave the object unchanged. It made the sheep and the loom part of a distinctly Diné world. The same was true of silversmithing. Metalworking traditions expanded during the 19th century through contact with Mexican craftsmen and neighboring communities. Navajo artists developed recognizable forms, including stamped silver, turquoise settings, and jewelry styles that became central to family economies and visual identity. A culture capable of absorbing new knowledge is not less authentic than one that remains isolated. It is more likely to survive. By the 18th century, Diné communities occupied a large region centered on Dinéta and the Four Corners. Pastoralism supported population growth and expanding herds. Raiding and trading connected Navajo, Pueblo, Ute, Comanche, Apache, and Spanish communities in unstable relationships that could change from alliance to violence. Families were incorporated from many origins, yet Diné language, clan structure, ceremony, and homeland created continuity. This history explains why the Navajo could become culturally distinctive within a relatively short archaeological time frame. The northern migrants did not arrive as an empty template. They carried language, kinship systems, knowledge, and spiritual traditions shaped in the Athabaskan world. The Southwest did not erase those foundations. It transformed them. Then the United States attempted to destroy the society that had emerged. In the 1860s, military campaigns led by Kit Carson targeted Navajo crops, orchards, homes, and livestock. Thousands of Diné people surrendered or were captured and forced to walk hundreds of kilometers to Bosque Redondo in eastern New Mexico. The imprisonment is remembered as Hueldi, the Long Walk period. Hunger, disease exposure, and inadequate supplies killed many. The campaign attacked the exact system that had made the Diné strong: mobility, livestock, food production, family networks, and connection to homeland. In 1868, Navajo leaders negotiated a treaty allowing the people to return to part of Dinéta rather than being removed permanently to Indian territory. The return became a defining act of survival. Families rebuilt herds and homes. Reservation boundaries later expanded, and the Navajo Nation grew into one of the largest indigenous nations in the United States. Genetic studies sometimes describe the Long Walk and related violence as possible population bottlenecks, especially among families who hid in remote areas or survived through small groups. Certain rare inherited disorders occur at elevated frequencies in Navajo and Apache communities because founder effects and endogamy can increase variants that were rare in larger populations. But medical genetics is not a map of cultural identity, and this research carries a painful ethical history. Navajo individuals have been measured, sampled, and studied since the early 20th century, often under unequal conditions. Biological materials were not always handled with the understanding, consent, or community control expected today. Genetic explanations sometimes blamed Navajo biology for illness while ignoring uranium exposure, poverty, inadequate medical access, forced relocation, and other social causes. In 2002, the Navajo Nation placed a moratorium on human genetic research within its jurisdiction. The decision arose from concerns about exploitation, misuse of samples, privacy, cultural beliefs, and the absence of laws ensuring tribal control over genetic information. That moratorium is one reason sweeping modern claims about the Navajo genome should be treated cautiously. There is no unrestricted, comprehensive whole genome survey representing every Navajo clan and region. A viral script can invent certainty more easily than scientists can ethically collect the evidence. The difference between ancestry and citizenship is especially important here. The Navajo Nation is a sovereign political nation, not a genetic category produced by a laboratory. Membership is governed through law, family records, and community relationships. A commercial DNA estimate cannot enroll someone, remove someone, or replace the responsibilities created through clan and kinship. Two people can carry similar ancient ancestry while belonging to different nations with different languages, histories, and governments. This is also why percentages can become dangerous. A model may describe a sampled Athabaskan population as partly Paleo-Eskimo related or estimate local Southwestern admixture, but those numbers depend on chosen reference populations. They do not divide a living person into cultural fractions. The ancestors represented by each component had already mixed before modern tribal names existed. Treating statistical ancestry as a measure of authenticity repeats the same outside pressure that reduced indigenous identity to blood quantum. The genetics are most useful when they answer narrower historical questions. Did Southern and Northern Athabaskan peoples retain related maternal lineages? Yes. Did Southern Athabascans experience a bottleneck and later gene flow in the Southwest? The evidence supports that. Did later Arctic ancestry contribute to the broader Na-Dene genetic history? Genome-wide studies indicate that it did. Did scientists prove that the Navajo descend from Amazonians or prehistoric ocean voyagers? No. That separation between evidence and invention makes the real story stronger. It replaces a sensational mystery with a documented sequence of survival. An ancient American foundation, an Arctic encounter, a continental migration, and the creation of new kinship in the Southwest. Every layer matters, but none alone defines the Diné people who inherited, transformed, protected, and carried all of them into the living present. The 2025 Picuris project demonstrated a different approach. It was initiated with Picuris Pueblo, included tribal participation and control, combined oral tradition with archaeology and genetics, and focused on questions important to the community. Its findings about Athabaskan migration were secondary to its central result: strong continuity between ancient Picuris people and present-day members. Even that careful study cannot define Navajo identity. It can only illuminate one part of regional history. Diné origin teachings place the people within a sacred history of emergence, movement, and life between the four sacred mountains. Scientific migration models address genetic relationships and archaeological chronology. These forms of knowledge ask different questions and should not be forced into a competition in which one must erase the other. DNA can estimate when populations are separated. It cannot measure Hozo, the Diné principle often translated through ideas of beauty, balance, harmony, and right relationship. A genome can detect ancestry shared with Northern Athabascans or Pueblo peoples. It cannot decide who belongs to a clan, who carries ceremonial responsibility, or what makes Diné a homeland. This distinction reveals the final problem with the phrase true ancestry. It suggests that one hidden biological answer can correct everything a person knows about themselves. But the Navajo were never simply a genetic branch waiting for a laboratory to name it. Their ancestry is biological, linguistic, cultural, political, spiritual, and territorial. The genetic evidence does correct several outside assumptions. It supports the northern relationship expressed by the Athabaskan language family. It shows that northern Diné-speaking populations were themselves formed through older First American and Paleo-Eskimo-related ancestry. It supports a bottleneck during the southward migration. It records extensive admixture with peoples of the Southwest, including maternal lineages likely incorporated locally. And the newest Picuris evidence supports a relatively late Athabaskan arrival or expansion in at least part of the northern Southwest. None of this makes the Diné less indigenous to the Southwest. Every nation has a history of movement. A homeland is not invalid unless a population has occupied it unchanged since the Ice Age. The Diné built relationships with the land through settlement, ceremony, burial, livelihood, defense, and memory. The United States itself recognized those ties in the Treaty of 1868 after violently attempting to remove them. The title says, "The Navajo were never what we thought." The real correction is not that they came from a secret continent. It is that outsiders mistook adaptation for borrowing, mixture for contradiction, and recent transformation for shallow identity. The first Athabaskan-speaking families who entered the Southwest carried an ancestry already layered by ancient Arctic encounters. They met Pueblo and other Southwestern peoples and incorporated new relatives. They adopted crops, livestock, technologies, and artistic practices, then transformed them until they became inseparable from Diné life. They survived Spanish expansion, warfare, forced captivity, the destruction of herds, and the Long Walk. They returned home and rebuilt. The missing signal at Picuris was never proof that the Navajo lacked a past. It was proof that the most visible chapter began later than many people assumed.